Hello everyone, I'm Jeremy Barber, founder of Tacklebox Architecture, a Brooklyn-based architecture and design firm, and I'm here with Design Milk for DMTV Milkshake. I'm going to pull some questions out of this box. Okay, you've used all kinds of amazing materials in your retail interiors. Can you share a time when you were really flummoxed about a special material, whether copies of the New York Times, Southern Pine Sticks, or whatever else, and how you figured out what to use? It's true, we've used a lot of unconventional materials in our projects, but the design never really starts with the material. Usually in our process, a narrative emerges where we take into context the local condition, maybe a story about the building, the brand history, and as that narrative emerges, quite often the materials suggested or it becomes clear that it's the right material for the project. The very first ESOP project that we did was the first ESOP in the Americas. Started off as a temporary pop-up in a kiosk in Grand Central. And we thought, why not take a kiosk for what it traditionally would be used for, a place of information or orientation, a place you get a newspaper or a map. And we constructed the entire project, both the kiosk and ultimately the first brick and mortar store, entirely out of the New York Times newspaper. The store itself was made of 400,000 individual strips of newspaper. And so in a way, to the question, it's often not a challenge to find the right material, but in this case, it's one thing to propose that you build a project out of newspaper, but to convince a contractor and fabricators that it's possible to work with a material like this can be a challenge. We've always seemed to luck out in that once the narrative is there and the design is clear, we tend to attract fabricators or builders that are interested in the work. With that particular project, we worked with a fabricator in Brooklyn who had on staff a craftsman who had, for the last 10 years, doing his own artwork and sculpture out of phone books and newspaper. So sometimes, the material and the craftsman find us in the process. What was most special about your 10-year relationship with ESOP? Working collaboratively with Dennis Pafidis, the founder. The nature of our relationship was one in which, over 10 years, he became a mentor and a good friend. And in the way that we work collaboratively, I think the result was something that otherwise wouldn't have been realized if we didn't have that collaborative exchange. I had never heard of ESOP when we first started working with them. We did the first projects in the Americas. And with that we were really freed up to, I think it would be a challenge today with, there's so many images out there of, what would be an ESOP design, appropriate design. Back then, we didn't have the challenge of making something that would be the right ESOP look. So instead, we were able to establish what I always refer to as the spirit of the brand. And the nature of our relationship allowed us, as companies and brands grow, they go through growing pains, and often companies, especially over 10 years, they can lose touch with the DNA that made that brand special or unique. The nature of our relationship with ESOP and with Dennis in particular was that we could allow us to really fight for the spirit of the brand and what was right for the design. I've always said I would rather lose the project than lose the spirit of the project. And I think we shared that value with Dennis, and we always fought for what was right for the brand and the design. What's your most valuable lesson? I would say that we're all lifelong students. I've been running a practice for 14 years now and teaching architecture for 13 years. And, to be honest, I wasn't a very good high school student. In a rote learning environment, the memorization of correct answers and putting them back on a quiz or a test did not work well for me. I just couldn't, I couldn't succeed in that type of a setup. 25 years ago, I found myself in an architecture studio at Virginia Tech for the first time. And I was in an environment where learning took place through making and doing. And, I tell my students today that in teaching that I'm going to learn as much from them as they'll learn from me. And I think to take that approach as an architect, as a designer, that you're always learning, you're always a student, that design is found rather than dictated and executed. I think that kind of sense of wonder and amazement is what really drives us creatively. As a professor and a creator of physical spaces, how do you think the digital learning space, i.e. Zoom classes, could be improved? This is relevant because we're in the fall semester right now, teaching a lot of hours on Zoom. I think this type of interaction is challenging, but I think Zoom is just another tool in the tools that we use. The real challenge, I think, is that my studios we're very hands-on. In the first design studio, it's all hand drawing, it's all hand model making, and the studio culture, being in the same room with each other, picking up the models, taking them apart, and having those influence one another, and having a kind of a collective knowledge within the studio, that's so important. So one of the things that we're trying to do in this semester that we're experimenting with is that all of my students have a Mayline, and in addition to the camera that's facing you when you're speaking and presenting in Zoom, we have an iPad or another camera pointed at the drafting table. And that's allowing us, as we're talking, to draw, sketch, model, cut apart, take apart live, in addition to documenting that work and uploading it. Something else that we're doing is I love receiving something well made and by hand from someone. So in our case, in our studio, each student's going to take and create something, make an object, and then it's going to be mailed to one of their peers. And upon receiving that, each student's going to take the received item. That's going to be the catalyst for the development of their project in the next steps. So we're trying to take that, combine the analog and the digital as much as we can, and try to build community that way. I don't think it's ever going to, in terms of learning, I think it's really hard to remove being in the physical environment together. But, right now, that's the safest thing to do is, I think, to stay remote. And, these are challenges that architects and designers are very good at taking on. And I think I'm really curious to see how this group of students takes that challenge and then takes it to the next level. And, certainly in the spring, we'll be informed by that. As a dad, have you discovered a kid's craft project that might have inadvertently offered a new way of looking at your work or opened up an unexpected creative avenue? Yes, but I wouldn't say that there's been a craft project or that's challenged the way that we work, a new creative avenue. But if anything, it's reinforced that what we do as designers, it's so important to have that perspective that a child has. If you watch the way that children play, I have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old daughters. I have 2 girls that are so active with making. As kids are, they take the environment around them, and the way that they come to know it, especially when they're young, it isn't trying to understand what's the right way to do something, or as designers try to come up with a concept or a justification for their design. They just simply make. You'll see it all the time that kids take something like a cardboard box and immediately inhabit that box and make it their own. I think it goes back maybe to the earlier question of the most important lesson that we're all always students. I think that's been the biggest change for me with kids, having kids, is that I've learned way more from them than I think they'll ever learn from me. And at the heart of that is to always look at the world with a sense of awe and amazement, and come to know it by engaging with it and with play. So we're very fortunate that both my practice and with teaching are jobs in which, to do well, we just engage play. Okay, thank you very much.